everyone. It's so good to see so many names here today for Fielding's Call Across the Globe. And it's a wonderful way to also share with our whole community an important topic, sustainability, acting for social and ecological justice. Those of you who have been on many of these calls over several years will know that every year we take a different theme, and this year's theme is sustainability. So I welcome you again as you're all coming into the call and getting settled for an important hour. I'm just thrilled that we're here together in community across our various time zones and great distances. And as you all know, I am Katrina Rogers. For those of you who don't or maybe guessed today, I am president of Fielding Graduate University. And as we proceed with the agenda, I just want to remind everyone, and all of you are pretty Zoom aware, but to remind you, please use the chat to engage with everyone on the call. You can also chat with people privately. I now invite you to put the location where you are today. As you know, where we live might not be where we are today, and any affiliation that you may have with Fielding that you'd like to share in the chat. And again, welcome. Our annual call across the globe has become a tradition since Fielding's 45th anniversary. So it hasn't been that long, but we're gearing up now for our 50th next year. And this year, the theme reflects also Fielding's theme for the year. 2023 is our sustainability year, how we act together individually and also collectively in our communities to support and advance and advocate for social and ecological justice. So to commemorate our 49th anniversary, I want to thank and welcome the President's Sustainability Advisory Council, who are not only participating now on today's call, but also designated 2023 as our Fielding Global Ecological and Social Justice Service Year throughout the world. And I want to thank those of you who've already contributed with stories and have put them on our website. And the purpose of the designation is to collect stories. So it's not just to collect the stories, it's to show an enactment of our values from Fielding community members engaged in service in your communities, wherever you are. We know from scholarly research that it only takes a small number of people to create the conditions for positive social change. When you take collective action, or when we do, all of us benefit. By seeing the conversation in the chat, I can see already that we're calling in from many places around the world. And again, I thank you for being here. I'm also pleased to welcome several Fielding trustees. Some I knew were going to be on the call, some I may not be aware of, so I'll be sure to catch up with all of you by the end of the call. But I want to welcome trustees, our board chair, Karen Bogart, who's calling in from Santa Barbara, California, Gary Wagenheim, who's calling in from Vancouver, Canada, I think, or maybe Whistler, British Columbia. A.G. Green, a faculty trustee who should be calling in from Florida, if I see that correctly. And as I said, any others, and we may have some people slightly misnamed, we will make sure that we acknowledge you before the end of the call. I just want to say, as always, we all appreciate the work the trustees do on behalf of Fielding. I always call you all the first line of frontier volunteers for Fielding. It's special when you're here for our events, and many of you have other connections to Fielding as alum, as faculty, and otherwise students. And we appreciate your dedicated service to Fielding and also to social and ecological justice. As I mentioned, the President's Advisory Council and Sustainability Advisory Council helped design this year's call. The Council's advisory group, another group of volunteers, alum, faculty, students, staff, and community partners, and they serve as consulting body to me, President's Office, on matters of environmental and social sustainability. Today's agenda includes a presentation from diverse panelists as well as a Q&A session. So I hope you will all have the chance to engage in conversation today. And I want to say, as is our usual practice, we are recording the call, but also if there are questions in chat that we don't get to by the end, you can be assured that we will follow up with each of the people who have asked the questions so that everyone's question is answered and heard and acknowledged. I also, before we begin, want to thank the National Diversity Collaborative for serving as a media sponsor This is wonderful when we have sponsorship, another kind of endorsement for the work. And the collaborative offers diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility certificate training in partnership with Fielding's very own Institute for Social Innovation. And just so you know, our alum, our community members, faculty, students, staff, all receive a substantial discount, a 25% discount for that certificate if you're at all interested. The next cohort is starting on March 16th, and there's still time to sign up. And the link about this program will be posted in the chat. I also want to say, as we get rolling, our first point of business is that our Fielding student, Eva King, will offer the Global Land Acknowledgement to us today. Eva is a PhD student in the Organizational Development and Change program at Fielding in the School of Leadership Studies, studying the role of quantum entanglement of language in social learning and cultural transformation. She also serves on the faculty research governance team for the HOD program. Thank you, Eva, for that important service. And is also the founder and CEO of GOSSOP, a consulting, research and consulting firm in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. In addition, she serves on the board of directors for the nonprofit organization called the Maryland Indian Tourism Association. She received her Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Masters of Arts in Distance Education and E-Learning from the University of Maryland. Eva is the Native American Adult of the Year in 2019 for her ongoing work reconstructing the Chesapeake regional dialect of the Algonquin language and culture, and continues to be an active member of and voice for the region's Indigenous community. Eva, thank you for being here, and I invite you now to offer Fielding's Global Land Acknowledgement.
Willie Gitchgill, good day. I greet you in the dialect of the Algonquin language of the Chesapeake region, the Piscataway tribe. Fielding Graduate University affirms and honors our commitment to Indigenous communities as the original stewards of the lands that we all inhabit. As a graduate learning community founded on the values of social and ecological justice, we recognize the deep history, critical sovereignty, expansive scholarship, and ecological knowledge of Indigenous nations around the world. We honor their elders, both past and present, as well as their future generations of emerging leaders. As a global distributed learning institution, Fielding Graduate University avows the following. We commit ourselves to promoting educational opportunities in partnership with Indigenous peoples worldwide who are interested in advancing educational and professional opportunities in Fielding's areas of expertise. We commit ourselves to consulting and cooperating in good faith with Indigenous peoples through their own representative institutions in order to provide opportunities for knowledge production and any other project affecting their lands, territories, or knowledge resources. We commit ourselves to promoting and protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples by actively promoting the scholarship of Indigenous communities through Fielding University Press to advance knowledge and provide venues for knowledge production and dissemination. We recognize and acknowledge that traditional knowledge cannot be separated from natural and cultural resources, and as such, all Indigenous knowledge should be protected and respected. By centering Indigenous communities, knowledge, tradition, and worldviews, we are working in partnership in order to enhance the next generation of world Indigenous leadership committed to building a more just and sustainable world. And now I will turn it over to Marjorie. Marjorie, take it away.
Thank you so much for that beautiful acknowledgement. I come to you from the lands of the Mexican people. I am in Playa del Carmen and in the Caribbean region. Let me just share my screen and we can get started. So my talk with you today is titled Trade, Trauma, and Resilience, Mapping the Impact of Climate Change on Caribbean Businesswomen. So I'm really glad to see Fred Steyer and Rich Applebaum here today because both of them introduced me to systems thinking. And these days I use the systems thinking literature, both with respect to the work that I do in the world and also with respect to my own self, which is, by this I mean, it has helped me to reframe how I think about what I'm doing and why. So I'll tell you a little bit about my origin story using the lens of systems thinking. And in doing it in that way, I guess I would say that the guiding force has been trauma and resilience. So perhaps it's no big surprise that's the theme of my talk. So I was born in this Caribbean region. I was born on the island of Haiti, and spent the first 5 years of my life in the Caribbean, being nurtured by the Caribbean Sea, feeling the wind and the waves of this home territory. This is where, in Haiti, is where my umbilical cord is buried. But as I said, my story is one of trauma and resilience. Part of that trauma was the migration from Haiti to growing up in Brooklyn, where I can remember as a child thinking, we have conquered nature. And the second, I think, traumatic experience is really highlighted by these two pictures I'm sharing with you. In them, I'm 9 years old. It's a before and after. I'm separated by just 6 months. But as I'm sure you could see, the light has gone out of that little girl's eyes. And the reason why is because my mother died in that 6-month period. And what I remember most about that experience was the sense of utter unjustness of it all. I didn't know anyone else with a dead mother. Why was I forced to experience this? And somehow, as a 9-year-old, I had already learned that the people who dealt with injustice, who righted the wrongs, were called lawyers. And so I told my father I wanted to be a particular hero of mine, Thurgood Marshall. I told him I wanted to be the next Thurgood Marshall. That is, if I could not save myself from my own traumatic experiences, and obviously as a 9-year-old, I did not have the language of trauma, but I did have that language of what's fair and just and what's not fair and what's unjust. And if I could not do that for myself, I could at least do it for others around me. So I would go on to earn a JD from NYU. I went off to big law. I started my career as a lawyer in the Clinton White House, negotiating international trade treaties around the world. And then I became an educator of sorts, working specifically with developing countries on learning about how to benefit from the trade regime. So I lived for 3 years all over the African continent. I helped Cape Verde become the 3rd least developed country to join the WTO. I spent lots of time in my favorite part of Africa, Dakar, Senegal. So I like to believe that in a way, right, like I became some version of Thurgood Marshall. And yet the story doesn't end there, right? The story of trauma and resilience. Let's fast forward to just this past summer. I was in a grocery store in my home state of California, and I had a little incident happen. The long version has sound and all sorts of animation to it, but I give you this. That is, I went to the grocery store and a white man happened to he tried to pass me in line. And I just said to him, sir, there's a line behind me. Don't cut me in this line. And he turned to me and said, I hate rude Black hoes. Black people deserve to be blown up. And it says so in the Bible. And this was just 3 weeks after Black people had indeed been blown up in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. And so I did not take that lightly, and I did not think it was some grand metaphor. I took it for the truth of what it was, that this man wished violence on me, and he did so because of the color of my skin. And 6 weeks after that incident, I was on a plane back to the Caribbean. I came and stayed in St. Croix because my nervous system and all of my psyche longed to return to this place of safety and connection, my home territory, where perhaps I wouldn't be forced to deal with the daily indignities of what passes for race relations in the United States. And so this story then is the launching pad for what happened here, what happened when I landed in the Caribbean and lived here for the first time since I was a child. Now, when you hear the words Caribbean, you might have these images come to your mind, right? Famous for its beaches and fun times and all of that. These are some of the images that the rest of us who live in this region have to deal with. Not quite as picturesque. And the only thing separating the past set of slides to this set of slides is a single word, and that is huracan, right? Huracan is the name that the indigenous Tainos of this region gave to hurricane. So even if you've never heard the word Taino before, even if you have no idea who the people who greeted Columbus actually were, you have been speaking their language every time you use the word hurricane. And hurricanes have had devastating impact in this region. Since we've started recording them in the late 19th century, we have had roughly less than 40 Category 5 hurricanes. The vast majority of those have occurred in the 20th and 21st century. So as I talk to you now, we have here in the Caribbean in 2017, the region experienced 2 Category 5 hurricanes separated by a single week. You could imagine the kind of devastation that wrought. And when I moved to St. Croix, I really experienced the lasting trauma that moment had on people. So when Fiona came, and that was my first experience of a hurricane, it wasn't even a hurricane when it landed in the US Virgin Islands. It was still a tropical storm, but I could feel the energy of fear in the people around me. And I got very interested in understanding not just the physical toll that climate change was having in the people of the region, but also the psychological toll, that is trauma and resilience. And so, like a true researcher that Fielding has led me to become, I have started asking the question, how are women in particular dealing with the impacts? And so a friend and I have decided to do this research study the pilot project will be based out of Jamaica. And we picked Jamaica for a reason. It is a relatively large population for the Caribbean, almost 3 million people. The St. Croix was 40,000 people and a landmass of 27 miles, right? So Jamaica is gigantic by comparison, though it is only half the size of New Jersey. So as you can see, it's not by Western standards a rich country, but Jamaica has a lot going for it. And that is in the caliber of women that are leading businesses in Jamaica. It has the highest proportion of female managers in the world, according to a World Bank study. Also, Jamaica has between 70 and 80% of graduates are women, even within traditionally male-dominated vocations, engineering, law, management. The graduates, 70 to 80% are women. They're going off and they're doing amazing things. But there's still this great divide, a wage gap between the earnings of men and women. men still earn significantly more. And then finally, I focus on how are women navigating themselves in this space? And this one quote jumped out at me, which is that Lacey Ann Bartley, who is a manager in heavy manufacturing industry, male dominated, says basically, I keep my head down and I have to be twice as good as men in order to keep things going and to block out the noise of public doubt. So I thought to myself, as these women are dealing with the realities of what it means to have these social roles in Jamaica, as they're dealing with that, how are they also dealing with climate change? And some of you might be questioning, what does climate change and gender have to do with one another? In fact, a great deal. Particularly in the export trades, what we find is whether you're looking at agriculture or manufacturing, the male-dominated areas of the industry tend to be more export-oriented, but the women are more successful. And when I was the trade and development person, I always knew that if I brought money to a region and I worked with the women-led groups, that money would serve so many purposes. Yes, it would go to trade and development. It would also go to school fees. It would also make sure that young girls got an education. That is, women manage to take the sum of money that men would use, no offense, men, but this was the reality of my experience, that they would use for one thing, export-led growth, and women change the culture of their world. And so, also relevant to my systems thinking that I've gained through my education here at Fielding, I want to do more than just one single study. And so I've built a trauma-informed resilience institute. I call it the Think Do Tank. We've researched these kinds of issues about how climate change is impacting the Caribbean region and the kinds of programming that we could bring in to support the women leaders who are the powerful sources of resilience in the community. And so with that, I'll pass it on to the next speaker. Thank you so much for listening.
Mute myself. Thank you. My gosh, Marjorie, that's such a hard act to follow. It was beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm John Ruffin. I am coming here to you from the unceded lands of the Chumash in coastal California, Santa Barbara. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to move through our presentation, Linda and I, with the slides on this screen. And I hope everybody can see that. Let me just get rid of a couple of things here. So we're delighted to have the opportunity to share with all of you. So glad there's so many. Share with all of you across the globe some of the work that we've been doing in an outfit called the Climate Dialogue Group. We're going to explain that in a minute. So I'm John Ruffin. I'm going to introduce my co-director, and Linda and I really helped put this together a couple of years back, Linda Eleanor, and we'll carry through some of the key elements of this development and its outreach. So Linda, welcome. And you're on for the first piece. Are you unmuted?
Yep, I am. Thank you, John. Thank you, Marjorie. That was great. I think we should get together at some point and share our experiences. So John and I met at the Organizational Development Network Conference in 2021. I gave a presentation on BOEM dialogues or BOEM-inspired dialogues, success in turning a complete prison system around in Virginia in terms of culture change. And we then hooked up with a couple people from a spiritual community, and we were all interested in how BOEM-inspired dialogue might be able to unfold new ways of looking at the roots of the climate system, but not only the roots, but what are some solutions that perhaps haven't been thought of before. So we wanted to bring people together, maybe marginalized voices, maybe people who just simply needed to be speaking together, but who hadn't before. So that's how we got together. And
So that led into formulation of what we called the Climate Dialogue Group. To Linda's point, that we've had people interested in bringing expertise in climate. Linda and I had a background in dialogue, Bohm-inspired dialogue. And we began to expand, including a number of fielding professors who were present: Richard Applebaum, David Blake Willis, Allison Davis White-Eyes, Fred Steyer, and other associates. And we began to hold some open sessions that were focused on dialogue, which we're not going to explain. Many of you know what dialogue is about, Bohm-inspired dialogue, and you can certainly Google that. We're happy to talk more about that. But as the real moderation or facilitation process in climate conversations that had been maybe stuck in some ways.
so the next thing we did was we held with Fielding support, we held a couple days sessions with Fielding on what we called Waking Up to the Climate Concerns, where we had a format that was based on Bowman-inspired dialogue. And we had climate experts, we had people from academia talk about that, and then we broke into small groups. And so that was very, very helpful in just helping ourselves bring dialogue out.
Yes, and then so in the midst of 2022, we're kind of asking ourselves, what is the next step we want to do with this collection of smart people, and so we initiated a series of which we called Voices in Climate Dialogue, and we actually had and this was really for the unheard voices globally to come together, those that needed to tell their stories, needed to be heard, needed to hear each other, listen deeply, build across cultural relationships. And we initially had a taker on Voices in Climate Dialogue from David Albert, a good friend of some of you in the faculty, and we initiated this with Equatorial Voices.
So we're going to kind of run you through what we learned from some of the people in the countries that we took on, which included India, Pakistan, Congo, Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya. We had presentations monthly where they would present us the problems they were facing as frontline activists, and then we would dialogue after that. And we recorded them, and eventually we'll put that out as our offering to a broader public.
These were exceptional presentations. And for instance, we started with India and the impact of climate on the already disadvantaged Dalit and tribal communities, the untouchables, if you will, and how the climate change was really driving them further down the chain of acquisition of health and resources.
In Uganda, the main thing there was that most of the men need to work in the communities. They weren't able to make a livelihood in their local communities. And so the women were sent off to get the water, with the men going into the cities. Women were unprotected, so they were often raped. They were often stolen from. It was just horrible. And as you'll see from what we're going to be showing you, it's always the most marginalized people who are most affected by the climate crisis.
Tanzania, maybe to surprise for some of you, has a huge population of people with albinism, more than 100,000 people, which is a lack of pigment in the skin, the African pigment in the skin. And they are demonized. The people with albinism are demonized in that country and held as responsible for all kinds of things. And it's a pretty grisly story, but they are really the bottom of the totem pole, if you will, in that country. And climate change has just exacerbated that, like it has in all of these other disadvantaged communities.
And in Kenya, you've probably heard that most people in Kenya survive based on the animals that they herd. With the drought there, so many of their animals have already died. We'll show you some photos in a minute. It's just devastating.
Now, understanding that these are not news reports that we're getting in terms of these voices. These are from individuals throughout these countries and their own experience. These are young leaders. We'll show you some pictures in a moment, but these are on the site experiences showing what's happening to their families, their communities, their regions. And so it's very personal and very dramatic. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been engaged in civil war for some time. The child slave labor in the mines of cobalt and coltan, other minerals, make up a huge amount of what's being brought into into our world in terms of electronics, and the lack of environmental protection in the DRC.
Pakistan, you probably heard that 1/3 of Pakistan fairly recently was completely covered by flooding, and the government still has not really helped or protect the local communities most impacted. So we heard from some academics there, and it's just way more devastating than our news would ever let you know. We'll show you some photos in a moment.
Each one of these. So these are the faces of those voices, and they're very personal. These have come to become a community to us, almost our family, because we hear from them weekly. In some cases, they write to us daily. We were introduced to them by the man in the center top here, David Albert, who was the founder of Friendly Water for the World. And because so many of these are drought-stricken areas, his work with that organization has helped bring them water catchment systems. But these are the young men and women, and I say young, most of them are under 40, some in their 20s, but very bright, strong voice, local leaders. Linda, you might want to point out some.
Yeah, right around David, there's Robert at the very left, and then Raul, and then right next to David is Getri. They're all probably in their 20s, 30s, all frontline activists. They send us photos, they send us news clippings from their local press, which we do not get in the States, which fills out our understanding of what's really happening there, which is just
Point out two particular. Getri is the woman in the upper right here. Powerful voice in Kenya, and down here is Helen in Uganda. She runs an organization called Rape Hurts, and the Ugandan situation where women are now attacked on the long water carrying routes. She has formed an organization to work with those women both before and after, so to protect them and as well. So these are members of our family at this point. We'd love to have you meet them at some stage. What this is just a series of collage that they have sent us. So I just start with the upper left-hand corner, which is cattle who's dying in the drought, and you can see them. That's how devastating that is. One of our friends on the previous slide lives off of his sheep herd, and at one point the drought, all of his sheep died. It's like his whole entire life savings have gone.
Yeah. The slide on the far right bottom is a shot from India where the Dalits live. You can see how very poor and devastated that living condition is.
The man in the middle here is an albino in Tanzania, and they're relegated to the least amount of resources. So this is the water resource that he's allowed to use. In lower right, lower left here, the local authorities actually shot these cattle because of the difficulty between the ranchers and the pastoralists, and so a lot of that internal conflict has been exacerbated.
And this again is the look at the map of Pakistan, how the red is where the flooding happened. And it was amazing to us to hear that after many, many months after the flood, the government still had not given any assistance to the locals.
And so this is, as we were hearing the presentation from Herman in the Democratic Republic of Congo, one of the things that he mentioned among so many others was the human slavery and the high-tech slavery, because we really need to take responsibility for what is happening, even though it's, a few hands down the line. It ends up in America and ends up in global north in terms of our cell phones, our electric vehicles, computers, all of the things that need the precious metals that are mined by these children. And without support and without health arrangements, and so it's a hugely difficult situation that was brought to our attention.
This is our last slide, but if anyone's interested in what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a couple of books have come out recently. One is called Cobalt Red by Siddhartha Kara, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives, really interesting. Another one by John Perkins, a third edition of his Confessions of an Economic Hitman, really helps us understand how our global capitalistic economy has spread all over the world in terms of its colonialism and extraction and what it's doing. So anyways, we leave you with that because it helps us understand how we got to where we are right now.
Right, and I would just mention that the faces that you saw on the previous slide were all known to David Albert. He knew them all to begin with, and they did not know each other. And so one of the things that this platform, the Climate Dialogue Group, has provided is a platform, a catalyst, if you will, to reach out and bring them together in a Zoom that we hosted. So they met each other for the first time on the Climate Dialogue Group Zoom, and now they have begun to form planning and coordinating their own interactions, their own plans on a local basis. So how they begin to plan together around the globe. Let me just say in closing, this initiative that Linda and I are co-directing and have kind of gotten underway really gives us hope that we can continue to be a catalyst and a platform for this kind of climate concerned voices that need to be heard and need to hear each other in the context of dialogue. So we've had some success so far where we're looking at where we go from this point on. So we're very open to your thoughts and your contributions and participations. You can participate with us at the website climatedialoguegroup.com. It's got quite an extensive library at this point, number of other features we're happy to talk with you about. So thank you very much to all. And Julie, I think you're the next one up.
Yes, thank you very much. If you're finished sharing, then I can share. I believe that's how this works.
Oh, I thought that was going to do it on it.
I know, automatic. Let's just automatically do this. So, as John said, need to get rid of a few of these things here, and then bring up my slides. I'd like to start with a little bit of an introduction of myself here. Let's see, is that going? Yes. So I am Julie Smenswick O'Brien, also a graduate of Fielding Graduate University in 2017, received my PhD. I'm currently, along with being a member of the Sustainability Advisory Group, I am also a fellow at our Institute for Social Innovation. And very proud of both affiliations and glad that I'm able to contribute to both. I also have an appointment presently as a community faculty member. I think some of you might know it as an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Public and Nonprofit Leadership at Metro State University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Community faculty are like fielding scholars. We're considered scholar practitioners or academic practitioners. Many of us are hired to bring our expertise as practitioners into the academic world there at Metro State. And Metropolitan State is one of 7 state universities that are part of a Minnesota state system, along with over 25 two-year colleges. And the entire system has a commitment to, we're calling it Equity 2030. And by 2030, we're hoping to eliminate all the disparities for students in terms of graduation rates, in terms of enrollment, and so on. At present, at Metro State, we have about 10,000 students, half of whom are students of color. We are an urban university right in the heart of St. Paul. So the only other thing I'd like to say about this slide here, and by way of introduction, is that I was working for Bread for the World. It's a Christian citizens lobby on world hunger. I was working with the education group. And we came across a speech that Henry Kissinger had given in 1974 that focused on world hunger. And in that speech, he was addressing the World Food Council, and Kissinger said that within a decade, hunger would be eliminated in the world. And you've seen from some of the presentations here today, and I'm sure you can just look around you. All we have to do is think about the lockdown. Hunger has not been eliminated from the world. But for me, that kind of message, along with a message that came from Bread for the World, which was that there could be all the charity in the world to try and address world hunger, but a single act of the state could undo all of that. And the state being governments, whether their actions or their inactions. And that lasted for me for a very long time. So if you saw my bio, I had worked for a number of agencies in Minnesota, including the Agriculture and the Natural Resource Agency, and tried to carry into my professional life this kind of commitment. I'm choosing to call this everyday social and ecological justice because these items, or the activities that I'm going to describe to you in a moment here, are all ones that came into my world in Minnesota, which is a state of the United States in the upper Midwest. And so I'd like to speak to each of them now. The first is a very controversial proposal that actually arose many more than the 7 years ago, but 7 years ago it came to my attention. And if you see the picture and the message, not this mine and not this place, we just heard about mining cobalt in other parts of the world and the difficulties and dilemma with that. Well, there are some mineral leases that were available here in northern Minnesota, and those mineral leases would allow companies to mine in Minnesota. Now, Minnesota, some of you may know, has a long history of mining. In World War II, supposedly the state produced about 75% of all the steel that was used for armaments during World War II. And as recently as 2017, a study showed that 85% of the iron ore, the steel that's produced in the United States still comes from Minnesota sources. So we are not a state opposed to mining. However, the mining that is being proposed in this location would be copper sulfur mining. Now, you see a large body of water here. This particular site that the arrow points to is on the eastern edge of the most visited temperate wilderness area in the United States. It is the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, which was first designated in 1964 and has had successive protections, most recently by the Secretary of the Interior in January of this year. Because mining in the state is governed by a 1902 mining law, and that mining law did not account for mining in these kinds of water-rich areas. There have been studies of copper sulfur mining, copper nickel sulfur mining. When the copper nickel is mined, one of the byproducts is sulfur, which comes up, and in an environment like this could become sulfur acid and could affect this, not only the water body that you see here, but the boundary waters that are between Minnesota and Ontario, Canada. Those boundary waters, it's about 1 million acres of water, and they are interconnected. Many of them are probably even interconnected through groundwater, but the entire boundary waters has about 1,200 miles of canoe trails, 2,000 campsites, and it is a wilderness area. You cannot go there and hope you'll find the drugstore on the corner if you need something. So what I'd like to speak to in this is there's a great amount of controversy about this whole mining operation. Of course, the company that's involved stands to make money, as industries often do. However, it's owned by a Chilean company that does not have a very good track record of its mining operations. The tensions are that the company will argue that, well, the minerals from here, as John and Linda were saying about cobalt and other parts of the world, that the minerals from here, they could be taken more safely, there would be better technology, and they would, be able to protect the waters and so on. Well, on the surface of it, it sounds like, well, that would be something of an argument. And an argument is also made that, well, there are better environmental protections in the United States. And in fact, there are not better environmental protections for this kind of water-rich environment. The mining protections are for more land-based kinds of mining rather than for mining in a water-rich area such as this is. So what have I done? So I've been engaged for now about 5 years, and you see on the graphic here or on my bullet points, I agreed to be a quote wilderness warrior, which essentially means that I try to advance the efforts to protect this area. I have an email list. I know some of you, I think, might be on it. I've made financial contributions to help this. I have also supported the congressional author of a bill to permanently protect this area, because even though the Secretary of the Interior, who has authority over this area, made the decision to protect this land for 20 years, that is still 20 years. And some of these larger corporations could wait for 20 years and then hope for a change in the administration. So a federal law would better protect this area, and that is the hope. This is Representative Betty McCollum. She happens to be my representative, and she's in the tradition of some other great wilderness protectors that we have had, Representative Bruce Vento, and also Senator Walter Mondale, whom some of you probably would recognize. Anyway, my last sort of engagement is the last bullet, that I love and use the boundary waters, as does my family. And so what I've tried to portray here is that this is a longer ago involvement that I had, and the kinds of things that I've done, if you will, more or less in my own area. The next thing I'd like to speak about is, it'll be 3 years in May that Mr. George Floyd was killed on the streets of Minneapolis. And this was a tremendous shock to many people, not the least of which was those of us actually living here. After his death, there were riots, burning. You probably saw it on the news. Perhaps you did. If you are from different countries around the world, maybe you did not. But at least here back in Minnesota, we saw that there were peaceful protests that in fact did happen in many parts around the world. People appalled at what had happened to Mr. Floyd. There is still a memorial at 38th Street and Chicago Avenue in South Minneapolis. And I would like to acknowledge the painter of this painting here. He's Mr. Adam Boucher. He is an alum of Metropolitan State University, where I teach. And this picture is on our website. It is on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion page as a reminder of our university's commitment to anti-racism. So what else did I do with this? I was not really among the marchers. I am not physically able to do that, but because I teach this course on this graduate course on leadership, I incorporated this into my course. I have one module on what are the moral underpinnings of public service leadership, and I included Black Lives Matter, the death of Mr. Floyd, the death of other Black Americans, the hands of police, and so students have a chance to write, to take the moral principles and apply them to a number of different areas, one of which is the death of Mr. Floyd. Some students who actually lived in the neighborhood wrote about it with great pain. And I have them write about wicked problems. And it's been a real challenge for me to actually read all these wicked problem papers when they are about something that is so awful. So one more thing that I did was I started reading more. Among the things that came to my attention was this book by Chad Montree, published recently by our Minnesota Historical Society, about Whiteness in Plain View, History of Racial Exclusion in Minnesota. And that is a real eye-opener how from after the time of the Civil War, Minnesotans, sparsely settled area, but Minnesotans were concerned about Black freemen coming to the North and all of the kinds of things that went on to keep Black former slaves from coming to this part of the upper Midwest. And I'm only about a third into it, but it is, I remember in some of the fielding sessions, we had what we called our sisters group, and then our brothers group started. And in our sisters group, very often my Black fellow students, the women would say, you know, you white folks need to do your work. So I'm trying to do some of my work. In previous slides, I talked about the mining up in northern Minnesota, with which I have been involved for some 5 to 7 years. I also talked about the death of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis, which happened 3 years ago. And something that recently has come to my attention through the investigative reporting of the New York Times is migrant children that are being employed in Minnesota in one of our major meat packing plants in the southwestern part of the state. Worthington, Minnesota is the home of JBS Meats, which is owned by a Brazilian company. And a reporter for the New York Times had traveled to 7 states and talked with over 100 children in 20 states altogether, child migrants, and found that these children are working in construction, meat processing plants, and food production plants, many dangerous places throughout the United States. And this town in Minnesota, Worthington, Minnesota, according to the author of the article, the town has received more unaccompanied migrant children per capita than almost anywhere in the country. You would see that on the left side of the screen. On the right, a follow-up from the Washington Post a few days later, on March 3rd, 2023, a whole discussion of a cleaning company that illegally employed a 13-year-old girl and the consequences to her and to her family once this was found out. In the United States, children under 16 are not supposed to be employed unless there are certain extenuating circumstances under law. Anyway, this same meatpacking company has locations not only in Worthington, Minnesota, but also in Grand Island, Nebraska. And the Washington Post story is essentially about Grand Island, Nebraska, what happened to a 13-year-old girl who had been employed by the cleaning company that cleaned this plant. The 13-year-old girl has now disappeared. Her father was arrested for driving her to work, essentially driving an underage child to a workplace. And her mother may be implicated for trying to get her daughter the fake papers to be employed. So what's heartbreaking about this story is that the entire family has been ruined essentially by the fact that the child was employed illegally. On the other hand, the tension here is that the families need the money, and the children who come here unaccompanied often are sending their salaries back to the families in their countries of origin. They are also paying exorbitant fees to the people that are housing them, feeding them, and filling out paperwork for them. So this is long ago past of the mining in northern Minnesota, a 3-year ago past of Mr. George Floyd's death, and now this child labor in the packing houses in one of our cities in Minnesota. So right in my own backyard, essentially, many issues of social and ecological justice that can be addressed. And I have not yet decided what I may do about this child labor in packing houses, but at a minimum, I might write to my local legislator and see if something can be done about it. I would now like to talk about something hopeful that I am involved with, which is the Northwoods and Waters of the St. Croix Heritage Area. The St. Croix River is one of the boundary rivers between Minnesota and Wisconsin in the upper Midwest of the United States. And I have been serving on the board of directors for this organization. It's a nonprofit, serving on it for the last 5 years. And this program of heritage areas is a program of the United States Park Service. And these heritage areas are, they are studied, and they are then recommended to the Park Service and to the Congress as areas of significant history to the United States that helped the United States develop as a country and provided a unique perspective on the development and the history of the United States. So this particular area, this heritage area, is 7,800 square miles. It covers 4 tribal territories, 18 counties, and spans the 2 states. And what is important in the heritage areas is that they are not reserves or preserves that are set aside, but they are places where people actually continue to live and work and have jobs and so on. But the idea is to celebrate the historical, cultural, natural, and economic resources of the watershed of this area. So stories are important, and some of the important stories in this area, this St. Croix River Heritage Area, is the idea of sustainable forestry, the immigrants that came here and settled very peaceably. The fur trade was very active. And we also have 4 indigenous tribes in the watershed who are still resident on their ancestral lands. The one thing that's interesting about sustainable forestry from this part of the upper Midwest, and that includes eastern Minnesota and western Wisconsin, is that after the great logovers, the logging operations of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, almost denuded these 2 states of all their white pine and some of the beautiful trees that had been here since before settlement. The erosion became a very big issue and a big problem. So the forestry leaders at the time realized that if they were going to have a livelihood over the long term, they would need to replace these trees and to then farm or grow trees for forestry purposes, logging, lumber, grow them in a sustainable way. So at the present time, from this region of eastern Minnesota and western Wisconsin, about 30% of the sustainably produced lumber in the United States comes from this region. One way that we remember what we are about here in this North Woods and Waters of the St. Croix Heritage Area is the word recipe. It's a way to remember that we're interested in recreation, education, conservation, interpretation, preservation, and economic development. So on the left, you see our little logo for the North Woods and Waters of the St. Croix Heritage Area. In closing, what I'd like to remind is that every day we have a choice to do ecological and social justice. So I ask you, what things come to your attention in what world? What are the kinds of things that you might notice that seem to call for your attention? What actions can you take? What would lead to ecological justice? What would lead to social justice? And we need to remember that every day we have a choice. So let us go onward. Thank you for your time and attention.
So Fred, I'm going to turn it over to you now. And if you can do a Q&A, and I want to remind attendees, please put your questions in chat. We will answer every single one, no matter what. And thank you again, Julie, and others for all that you do in this area. So Fred, I turn it over to you.
Oops, there we go. Yeah. So thanks so much, Katrina, and thanks, Julie. And I'm not sure that we have time for Q. I'm not so sure about the A part. But then it might be good that an important part of dialogue is holding the question and allowing the tension from questions to surface. So I want to do something a little different, but just to set up the questions and just to take a minute or two just to do it. One is pointing out, just as a quick extension from Julie's talk, that one of the things that surfaces, and this is looking for patterns across all of the talks, that in recognizing the importance of sustainability and social and ecological justice, people are operating, we all are operating out of different frames. And one of the things that makes Julie's, the Boundary Waters case so compelling is that it could be understood as an economic situation, which is the mining point of view, right? And it could be seen as an environmental point of view. And ideally, these two would be fused, and this is why the Climate Dialogue Group is so important. These two would be fused together, but that's a real challenge, but recognizing the frames that people are coming from. A second thing that cuts across all of these is the importance of the local and the global, that each of the issues, and this is the thing from, from each of the presentations, from Marjorie's, from Ava's introduction to our session, from John and Linda's work, from your work, Linda, the importance of the local, but also recognizing if we see the boundary of the local as confining us, we really struggle when it comes to looking at the issues globally, and then how to appreciate the tensions between local and global and look at them systemically. I also wanted to invite everyone to look at patterns across. This is the, thanks so much for introducing it this way, your work, Marjorie, but this is the systems point of view, right? To see what are the patterns that connect us. And thanking all of our presenters so far. Thank you, Katrina. Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Marjorie. Thanks, John. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, Julie. And thanks all of you for participating. But looking deeply at what is the pattern that connects Katrina's opening in terms of creating space for sustainability? How does that feed into Ava's way of bringing Indigenous ways of knowing and being? How might Indigenous ways of knowing and being feed into ways of thinking about trauma and resilience? How might thinking about trauma and resilience feed into the importance of understanding where people are coming from and empathy in climate dialogue? How does empathy and rooted questions of climate dialogue feed into questions of everyday social and economic justice? And how does that feed back into going full circle the importance of sustainability and a call across the globe? So, right, we are, everyone is very enthusiastic. So we're a bit over on time, but if there are questions that are posted in the chat, I invite you to share them with each other. And what I'd like to do is to recognize that this has been a wonderful conversation and an opening to thinking about these issues very seriously. And turn it back over to you, Katrina, for bringing things together.
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you all, as Fred has already said, and Fred, that was a lovely wrap up. Every call across the globe is different, but it shows the diversity of our community, the range and the breadth of our research, our scholarship, and our practice, and the impact that you are all having on the betterment of communities around the world. So in appreciation for that, thank you. If you have experiences you'd like to share, stories you'd like to tell, as I said, related to actions you've taken or things you've observed, please send us a paragraph at media@fielding.edu. And as we plan our 50th, we hope to collect 50 actions for social and ecological justice by the end of the year. That is our aspiration, and my experience at Fielding is once you set forth such an aspiration, we will exceed it. I thank you again all for being here today. We're just about the top of the hour. I can see from some names that some of you are in time zones it's quite late, but quite early. And again, thank you for being part of the Fielding community. I hope to see you throughout the year, virtually and in person, in the many fora that we have. And do post your questions. You also may send questions to president@fielding.edu, and we will certainly send them the way of the participants. So with that, I will go ahead and conclude this call. Thanks everyone for being here.